It's 1943, and Allied spy Virginia Hall is sitting in a crowded Parisian cafe, just 3 tables away from a high-ranking German officer who's carelessly discussing tomorrow's troop movements with his colleague. She has exactly 4 minutes before she needs to leave to avoid suspicion. In those 4 minutes, she memorizes the locations of 17 German checkpoints, the timing of 3 supply convoys, and the exact route of a classified ammunition transport, all without taking a single note. And today, I'm going to reveal exactly how these World War II spies could absorb enemy plans faster than you can read a restaurant menu. By the end of this video, you'll understand why the CIA still uses modified versions of these techniques, and why some of the world's most successful people have quietly adopted these wartime memory methods for their own careers. But first, let me tell you about the spy who memorized an entire German battle plan in less time than it takes to order coffee, and how that single act of mental gymnastics changed the course of D-Day itself. It's May 1943, and British Naval Intelligence Officer Ewan Montagu is staring at a stack of documents that could determine the fate of the entire Allied invasion of Europe. These aren't just any documents, they're the complete fabricated invasion plans for Operation Mincemeat, the most audacious deception operation in military history. The catch? He and his team have exactly 10 minutes to memorize every single detail before the documents are sealed inside a briefcase, chained to a corpse, and dropped off the Spanish coast to fool the Germans. 10 minutes, hundreds of pages, fake troop movements, fictional commanders, made-up landing sites, all designed to convince the Germans that the Allies would invade Greece instead of Sicily. One forgotten detail, one misremembered unit number, and the entire operation would collapse. But here's what sounds impossible. They did it. Not only did Montagu's team memorize those plans perfectly, but when questioned weeks later by skeptical Allied commanders, they could recite battalion numbers, supply routes, and timing schedules as if they were reading directly from the documents. And this wasn't some freak occurrence. Declassified training records from the Special Operations Executive reveal that the average SOE agent could absorb and perfectly recall 50 pages of classified intelligence in just 15 minutes. We're talking about radio frequencies, safe house addresses, contact codes, German patrol schedules, and detailed maps of enemy positions. But here's the statistic that will blow your mind. When captured Allied agents were interrogated under stress, and I mean real, brutal German interrogation, 89% never revealed the intelligence they had memorized. Not because they were superhuman, but because they had been trained in memory techniques so powerful that the information became literally unforgettable. So how did ordinary men and women, teachers, clerks, students, develop what seemed like photographic memory? The answer lies in 3 secret techniques that intelligence agencies had perfected. Techniques so effective they remained classified for decades after the war ended. The first technique that turned ordinary people into human recording devices has a name that sounds like fantasy: the Memory Palace. But this isn't some mystical concept. It's a 2,500-year-old Greek discovery that literally won World War II. Here's how it was discovered. In 477 BC, a Greek poet named Simonides was attending a banquet when he was called outside by 2 mysterious strangers. Minutes later, the entire building collapsed, crushing everyone inside beyond recognition. But Simonides could identify every victim by remembering exactly where each person had been sitting. That moment of tragedy revealed something extraordinary about how human memory. Fast forward to 1943. In the English countryside, SOE instructors were teaching this exact same technique to agents who would parachute behind enemy lines. They called it mental mapping, but it was pure ancient Greek technology. Here's how it worked in practice. Agent Odette Sansom needed to memorize the locations of 17 German ammunition depots across occupied France. Instead of trying to memorize a list of addresses, her instructors taught her to use her childhood home in London. She placed the first depot at her front door, the second in her living room, the third on the staircase. But here's the crucial part. She didn't just place them there, she created bizarre, unforgettable images. The ammunition depot at her front door became a giant German soldier trying to squeeze through her tiny mail slot. The depot in her living room became her grandmother knitting with sticks of dynamite instead of knitting needles. Why did this work so perfectly? Your brain remembers locations and bizarre images far better than abstract information. When Odette needed to recall those depot locations months later while being interrogated by the Gestapo, she simply took a mental walk through her childhood home. Every room triggered a perfect memory. The technique was so effective that by 1944, every SOE agent could memorize the layout of an entire enemy base just by mentally walking through their old school or neighborhood. They had turned their own memories into unbreakable safes. Now, while the memory palace worked brilliantly for structured information, what happened when spies needed to memorize seemingly random data, like radio frequencies, patrol times, or contact codes? This is where the second technique came in, and it's based on a simple but powerful truth. Your brain remembers stories 22 times better than isolated facts. Meet Nancy Wake, the woman the Gestapo called the White Mouse, because she was so elusive. In 1944, Wake was operating behind enemy lines in occupied France, coordinating with multiple resistance cells. Every morning she received updates that looked like complete gibberish. Patrol Alpha 7 passes checkpoint at 0630, frequency 4.215 megahertz, contact Nightingale uses phrase, the roses are blooming, supply drop coordinates, 45.7 hours 6, 40 degree north, 4.8357 degree east. Try memorizing that. I'll wait. Impossible, right? But Wake had been trained in what the SOE called the story chain method. Instead of trying to remember random numbers and codes, she would weave them into a vivid, connected narrative. Here's how it worked. At dawn, 7 white mice, that's Patrol Alpha 7 at 0630, scurried across the old radio tower, frequency 4.215 megahertz, where the nightingales sang about blooming roses, contact Nightingale's phrase, near the ancient coordinates carved into the church bell, the supply drop location. One continuous story impossible to forget. But here's where it gets incredible. Wake didn't just memorize one set of information. She was simultaneously tracking 17 different resistance cells, each with their own patrol schedules, radio frequencies, and contact protocols. That's over 200 individual pieces of critical intelligence, all stored as interconnected stories in her mind. And when the Gestapo finally captured and interrogated her in 1944, she gave them nothing. Not because she was being heroic, though she certainly was, but because the information was so deeply embedded in story form that even under extreme duress, her brain couldn't separate the narrative threads. The technique was so effective that one SOE agent, codenamed Prosper, survived 6 months behind enemy lines using nothing but story-memorized intelligence. No written notes, no hidden documents, just dozens of interconnected narratives that contained everything he needed to coordinate sabotage operations across northern France. But there was a third technique, so intense and so effective that it was only taught to agents heading into the most dangerous missions. They called it the pressure cooker method, and it was based on a terrifying discovery. Your brain remembers information better when you're under extreme stress. Here's how they discovered it. In 1943, British psychologists noticed something strange in debriefing reports from captured agents who had been tortured and released. The agents who broke under interrogation forgot almost everything they revealed within hours. But the agents who resisted, who held on to their secrets under the most extreme pressure, could recall those same secrets with perfect clarity months later. The stress had literally burned the information into their brains. So SOE instructors began training agents using controlled stress. They would teach new information while subjecting trainees to simulated interrogation, flashing lights, loud noises, and psychological pressure. What they discovered was revolutionary. Information learned under stress became virtually impossible to forget. Agent Violette Sabo experienced this firsthand before her final mission into occupied France. Her instructors needed her to memorize the identities and locations of 47 resistance contacts across 3 different regions. But instead of learning this in a quiet classroom, they put her in a mock Gestapo interrogation room. For 3 hours, while actors playing German officers screamed questions at her, while sirens blared and lights flashed, Violette studied those 47 names and faces. The experience was so intense that she later described it as more terrifying than actual combat. But it worked. When Violette was captured by the SS 4 months later and subjected to real interrogation, those 47 identities were locked so deep in her memory that even she couldn't access them under questioning. The stress of learning had created what psychologists now call stress-dependent memory, information that could only be recalled when she was calm and safe. This technique was so powerful that modern special forces still use modified versions today. But in 1944, it gave Allied agents something unprecedented: the ability to carry secrets that even stress couldn't extract. So how do we know these 3 techniques actually worked under real combat conditions? Because on June 5, 1944, exactly 1 day before D-Day, they faced the ultimate test. Operation Jedburgh was launching. 93 Allied agents were being parachuted behind enemy lines across occupied Europe, each carrying enough intelligence in their heads to compromise the entire invasion if captured. No backup plans, no written codes, no safety nets. Just human memory against the most sophisticated intelligence apparatus in history. Agent George Miller landed in the French countryside at 2 a.m., his parachute tangled in enemy telephone wires. Within 6 hours, he had been captured by a German patrol. In his mind were the locations of 17 Allied supply drops, the identities of 42 French resistance leaders, and the exact timing of coordinated sabotage operations across 3 departments. The Gestapo interrogated him for 18 straight hours. They used every technique in their playbook: sleep deprivation, psychological manipulation, physical coercion. But here's what happened. When they demanded the location of the first supply drop, Miller's brain automatically triggered his memory palace. He mentally walked through his childhood home in Yorkshire, but instead of revealing the real location, he gave them coordinates to an empty field 50 miles away. When they pressed him for resistance contacts, his story chain method kicked in. But the stories he told were completely fabricated, fictional narratives that sounded convincing but led nowhere. And because his memory had been trained under extreme stress, even under stress, his brain couldn't distinguish between the real intelligence and the false stories he was creating. The result? Miller fed the Germans completely false information for 3 days, while the real D-Day operations proceeded exactly as planned. He had become a human disinformation weapon, and the Germans never realized it. By June 10th, Allied intelligence confirmed that 87 of the 93 Jedburgh agents had successfully completed their missions. The 6 who were captured never revealed a single piece of actionable intelligence. The techniques that began with ancient Greek philosophers had just helped win the most important battle in human history. These weren't superhuman abilities. They were learnable skills that turned ordinary people into living, breathing intelligence vaults. And the most incredible part? You can learn them too. So there you have it. 3 ancient techniques that literally changed the course of history. The memory palace that turned minds into unbreakable safes. The story chain method that made random data unforgettable. And the pressure cooker technique that locked secrets so deep even stress couldn't reach them. These weren't just spy tricks, they were the mental weapons that helped win World War II. And the incredible part? You can use these exact same techniques today. Whether you're studying for exams, learning a new language, or just trying to remember where you put your keys. But here's what I want to know. Which technique are you going to try first? Drop a comment below and let me know. And if you want more mind-bending military history that connects the ancient world to modern warfare, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell.